Neural Breakdown, The Axons Battle in Concussions. By Maria Gerges, Kevin Provenson, Corinne Ouellette, Tobias Chin, and Julia Murphy.
Permanent neuronal damage, specifically to the axon, which is responsible for sending electrical impulses away from the cell body. If these nerve fibers are stretched, twisted, and severed, it can inhibit cognitive function. This topic is important to understand, as being aware of the signs, symptoms, and prevention of a concussion can help you and the people around you. Noticing the signs of a concussion is important when seeking a professional for a proper diagnosis, as a concussion untreated can lead to serious complications. One case of not treating a previous concussion properly is second impact syndrome, which involves the brain not being fully repaired and resolved when another one takes place. The second impact may not be strong, but due to the fragile state, one common misconception is that concussions can only occur with direct trauma to the skull. However, concussions are caused by any abrupt jolt that causes the brain to forcefully shift forward, backward, or side to side. While direct blows to the head can cause concussions, a hit to the body or neck can also cause your brain to reverberate.
Now let's dive into the parts of a neuron. First, you have the cell body, which is similar to your typical cell, with a nucleus, Golgi body, etc., and all the necessary organelles. Secondly, you have the axon, which carries the electrical pulses down to the other end of the neuron, which brings us to our last part, the dendrites, which receives and transmits messages to other cells. The junction of the terminal end of the neuron and the dendrites of the other neuron are called the synapses, which is where the signals are relayed. Now let's look into neural damage. If the damage occurs to the cell body where all the vital organelles are, it could lead to the dysfunction of the cell, and even possibly result in cell death. Damage to the axon leads to problems in the transmission of electrical signals and therefore also causes problems in communication between neurons. If the dendrites are damaged, there could be impairment to receiving and processing of incoming cells, which again leads to problems in transmission during synapses. Lastly, synaptic dysfunction leads to impairment in neural circuit function.
With concussions having the ability to lead to axonal injuries, we want to take a closer look at them. Axonal injuries happen when there is a shearing and or tearing of the axon in neurons. The cause of axon shearing in a neuron can be caused when there is a rapid acceleration or deceleration of the head. Because of the damage to the axon, there is a disruption in communication between the nerves and the brain, which can lead to cognitive and physical impairment that can be temporary or permanent, and in some cases lead to a coma. Axonal injuries are also hard to diagnose because they cause a small change in the brain which can't always be detected on scans. Normally, the way to recover from axonal injury follows the same steps of a concussion, where you need to rest for the first little bit, but some cases might need rehab to overcome long-term damage.
After a concussion, neurons undergo a process of repair and recovery to restore normal function. This repair process begins with the removal of damaged neurons. Immediately after concussion, damaged neurons may undergo a process called apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. Following apoptosis, neuroplasticity allows undamaged cells to reorganize and form new connections, compensating for the loss of damaged neurons. In the hippocampus, neural stem cells can generate new neurons through neurogenesis. It primarily occurs in two main regions of the brain, the subgranule zone and the subventricular zone. In the subgranule zone, stem cells give birth to progenitor cells, which are basically baby neurons, which will eventually mature into fully functioning neurons and join the brain's communication system, helping with memory and learning. In the subventricular zone, neural stem cells will produce neuroblasts. These neuroblasts are immature neurons that will eventually mature into inner neurons. This process of neurogenesis is necessary for the repair after injury to the neurons during and after a concussion.
When someone has had so many concussions, obviously their neural cells are going to be affected in some way. Through numerous traumatic injuries, one can develop CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy. This causes the death of nerve cells in the brain through a process called degeneration. CTE continues to get worse over time with recurring concussions. This is why it seems like once someone has had a concussion, they keep getting more after that, and it can only be diagnosed after death. It is caused most from contact sports or military combat. Concussion leads to CTE, which leads to cell death, or apoptosis. Apoptotic cells have been observed following TBI for both animals and humans. Neurons undergoing apoptosis have been identified within the injured tissue within a month of injury. To get all scientific, there tends to be an upregulation in apoptotic markers like c-Jun, with also an increased activation in anti-apoptotic proteins that regulate cell survival like BCL2. Overall, look at the risks associated with repeated head injuries and follow accordingly. When playing a contact sport, you should be aware of the signs of a concussion and how to spot one in order to get treated sooner rather than later. The earlier a concussion can be diagnosed, the quicker a person can recover and lessen the chances of experiencing prolonged symptoms. Wearing a helmet is important to prevent skull fractures and serious brain injuries. Wearing a helmet will not prevent you from getting a concussion, as hard enough impact or snapping of the neck will still cause your brain to move inside the skull. But wearing one can help mitigate the effects and long-term damage it can inflict. When you suspect a trauma to the head, you should immediately get diagnosed by a medical professional in order to rule out any serious head injuries that may be worse than a concussion. When diagnosed, you should rest for at least a week and not look at any bright lights for prolonged periods of time, such as phones, TV, lightly lit rooms, etc.
Thank you for watching.